Okay, I got my dish gloves on because today we're gonna get our hands dirty. This is a 2002 Toyota 4Runner. We're gonna do the valve cover gaskets, and you have to remove the intake manifold and a whole bunch of hoses around the outside of that to get that off, to get down to the valve covers. I already did the spark plugs and the coils the other day, but we're gonna go back in and take care of the valve cover gaskets today. So let's have fun. Come over on this side. We're going to want to try to block off these coolant lines to the throttle body before we pull them, so we don't have a big mess here. Okay, we got the upper plenum off. Now we have to work on the lower plenum, the intake manifold. Looks fairly simple. Should be another 4 bolts here. 1 there, maybe 5. Let's go ahead and pull those off and start pulling these vacuum lines out of the way. Just like the other videos I've seen about how to do this one job, there's a ground strap bolt right there and a bracket right there that you got to take off of this side in order to remove this. Let's go ahead and get that done. Looks like we got a wiring harness on the back right about here in the center. Plastic, be careful with that one. Might not be able to get access to these prior to loosening this mount because that one's buried back behind that and there's no clearance really to get in behind the brake booster, the master cylinder. So it's easier to go ahead and remove that as long as you're careful and you don't start knocking stuff into the intake or damage any of the surfaces on the intake manifold. Now would be a good time to shove something in the intake holes. Make sure that you don't get any debris in there while you're working in here. Use paper towels, rags, tape. Put a piece of tape over the top of it after you clean the oil off. That'll work just fine also. Let's go ahead and look at what we got going on with the valve covers here. As you can see, they're leaking quite bad. Actively leaking straight down into the valley. And on the bottom side there, leaking excessively. So let's continue. Okay, both sides of this engine are equally cluttered. I think that the driver's side is going to be a little bit more difficult because of that bracketry that's in the way, and the fuel line that's like the last video, which hasn't posted yet. The fuel line is right over the valve cover, so I think that's going to be a little bit more of a fight. So I'm going to go ahead and start on this side and see what we're dealing with here. as we saw, we're gonna have to disconnect the injector wire harness and a couple other pieces of the wiring harness down here by the exhaust manifold. And a couple of these harnesses that go across to try to get room here to work. Back here, there's a clip on the back right there. Just unclip that, she slides up. Just work around it. You can unclip this guy here too if you want. Get a little bit more room. Now what we want to make sure now is that we get the right valve cover gasket set that's got the half moons for the cam seal. 2 of those. Valve cover gasket, clean it up. And while you're here, double check that there's no oil down in the spark plug holes. You don't want to put this all back together and jam those coils back in there and have a misfire. So just take a look at everything else that's not related to this oil leak and see if there's anything else that needs to be addressed, vacuum lines or anything like that on your way in and out. Everything else looks pretty good. Might have been some Pennzoil in here at one point in time. Not sure. It's a machining error. It's not a physical damage thing. But the lobes on the cams look pretty clean. So let me go get some parts and we'll continue. Okay, so far we've taken the intake manifold off, both upper halves. So I got 2 gaskets for that. Those look correct. And let's see what we got in here. So the valve cover gaskets look correct. We got the tube seals for the spark plugs, but no moons. We don't have the half moons. So what we're gonna have to do is take a look at those and make sure that they're not leaking at all. And if they are, we can pull those and reseal them. This set didn't come with them, and I'm not gonna track them down at this point. They look clean, but we can always reseal those. Definitely don't wanna reuse that. So let's continue. One thing I noticed with this new valve cover gasket set is that it doesn't come with any grommets for the bolts to hold it down. But if you notice, the bolt collars are outside of the gasket, outside of the valve cover, so they're not going to leak. There's nothing there to leak, so we don't necessarily need any, and we don't need to add any silicone or anything to those. Totally fine. The moon gaskets, the camshaft seal gaskets, camshaft seals, they're in there nice and tight. I looked at them, they don't look like they're leaking or anything. I'm not going to disturb them. Those also didn't come with the kit, but we did get the valve cover gasket and the tube seals. Now, one thing to make sure of is right there on the cam seals, you clean any of that silicone away that was there before. Make sure that you don't get it inside of the head. You don't want that falling down inside the oil pan, blocking up the oil pickup screen. And you can either reapply some adhesive there, some silicone there, or you can put it on the gasket here, right where it's going to be. And also hit these corners on these half circles. Make sure you hit those corners, that's going to leak there also. Okay, we're on the driver's side now. This is going to be a little bit more convoluted, but should be able to get through it fairly quickly. The wiring harness again is going to fight you. Either looks like somebody's been in here before and broke that clip. They just break by themselves, so that's not a big deal as long as this stays where it's supposed to be, which it will, because the injector harness there will kind of hold it in that position. You really can't get that too far out of place. This bracket here is loose already, which is kind of an indication that somebody was in here. They didn't want to tighten it all the way back up, but we're not sure. So that's a 14 mil, I believe, on the bottom side of that. You're going to want to remove that because there's not really a good way to pull this valve cover up without hitting that or bending it. We don't want to do that. We got some fuel lines in the way. This vacuum line for the PCV system is going to stay on there for now because I don't want to forget to put it back on or lose orientation. So that should be fairly quick and simple. Famous last words. So if you're still watching, give me a like on that. And stay tuned because I'm going to be posting a few more videos later this week out at Dan's garage. Got a few nice projects. 72 GTO. He works on a 124 Fiat Spider. A couple other, the C10, the Sierra, 77 Sierra pickup truck. He's going to be doing the exhaust, hanging the exhaust on that, finishing it up, firing it up. So don't miss out on that. Subscribe, and I'll be posting a few more videos next week. So here we go. Okay, I opted to buy a new PCV valve. Goes back on this other one over here. It's usually the cheapest parts that cause the biggest problems. And these are like $3. So why wouldn't you? Don't try to clean the old one, just get a new one. Okay. It's the same point on the other ones that we did. Silicone up the edges here, grease up the centers. And the good trick about getting this one in is that as you're going to be tucking it underneath this wiring harness here, it's probably going to grab the cam or one of the tubes for the spark plugs, and it's going to pull up on this gasket and roll it. So again, once we get this set down, we're going to want to make sure that it's nice and tight, that the gasket didn't roll over, and get it all cleaned up as well as you can. You want to make it look like you know what you're doing. More so, we don't want to see any of that old oil. This is okay, this will dry up. We don't want to see any of that old oil. We want to come back and look at this in a week, make sure that everything's nice and clean, that it's not continuing to leak, or if it is still leaking, that we can identify where it's coming from. This was pretty self-explanatory, as it was the whole valve cover gasket. The bolts that hold this down were really loose. They were almost finger tight, and that was just because the material here smashed down over time from the heat. So everything should be good now. I'm gonna go ahead and set this back in, tighten it down, get the wiring harness and all the tubes hooked back up, and then I'll see it again in a minute when we start putting the intake manifold back on. gasket set up, ready to go. Surfaced and cleaned off the manifold here and in between the two upper halves of the plenum. You want to double check your work. Make sure that all of your injector wires and any vacuum lines that are down in the valley here, especially on this side, are addressed. You can get to these wires still. So you want to make sure there's nothing stuck underneath here. Make sure all your vacuum lines are out of the way. Just kind of take a visual look, make sure everything's good to go. Before you put this back down, you don't want to have to take it off again. And here we go. Okay, back to this side. You saw me fight with the fuel line down there because I forgot to put it on before I put the bracket on. So I had to fight underneath there to get that fuel line attached. Put the diagnostic port back in its position, but don't forget to put the ground strap. Don't forget to bolt that down. It won't run right. It's connected to something. It's probably the injector rail or something. It's just not going to run right. And it looks as if, though, everything else is in order. So everything's attached, everything's plugged in that I can think of. Check the oil, half a quart low. So we're gonna go ahead and start it. See if we got a vacuum leak, spray some brake clean in this area, see if we got any vacuum leaks after that, and let it warm up. Make sure that there's no oil leaks, any worse oil leaks, and let it warm up for a little bit, and that should be good. good. Spray your brake clean in moderation. If you have a misfiring spark plug wire, you'll find out the hard way. You don't want a whole lot of brake clean on the engine when that does happen. It'll turn ugly real fast. So be careful about that point when you're testing this way. Other than that, just gonna let it continue to warm up and make sure that the coolant isn't leaking. Double check the coolant level before she warms up. And Bob's your uncle.